Palestinians clashed Friday with Israeli police at the Al-Aqsa compound, with eyewitnesses confirming stone throwing and Molotov cocktails, while police hurled stun grenades. This replaced a celebratory mood in Gaza when the truce went into effect. Palestinians expressing relief and joy, but only after 243 of their compatriots were killed, including 66 children, while Israel suffered at least 12 deaths, mainly civilians.
This is a liberation. We won against the Jewish. We broke their pride. I hope God will protect the resistance. I say it's a victory. God stood by us. They killed young men, but my grandson was born and we called him Muhammad Dief. We called another child Alaska Sword. They're in good health. They will grow up and be young men. God is great. We are watching the media outlets. The victory of the resistance is a victory for all Muslims. The Palestinian resistance returned the dignity for all Muslims.
The truce cautiously welcomed across the world, but a circumspect view at the United Nations.
I appeal to the international community to work with the United Nations on developing an integrated, robust package of support for a swift, sustainable reconstruction and recovery that supports the Palestinian people and strengthens their institutions. I stress that Israeli and Palestinian leaders have a responsibility beyond the restoration of calm to start a serious dialogue to address the root causes of the conflict. Gaza is an integral part of the future Palestinian state, and no effort should be spared to bring about real national reconciliation that ends the division.
After a day-long General Assembly session Thursday saw countless countries insist on a de-escalation after a deadlocked Security Council further undermined its credibility.
Let us first see that the ceasefire is implemented, because many times ceasefire declarations were announced, but it was not implemented. So we're going to closely follow up what the situation on the ground is. And then, as I have also appealed for peace, I think both sides has an obligation, and also the United Nations has an obligation to implement all the resolutions, all the decisions, all the court decisions which is in front of us.
Washington, preferring a bilateral route, finally had something to show for it.
We remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet, relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for
it. Israel's Prime Minister, speaking earlier, said the military operation dealt a hard blow to Hamas, suggesting they'd eliminated key elements of the group's command structure and weapons cache. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
And Sherwin joins us now live from New York. Thank you as always, Sherwin. So our analyst earlier said this is a ceasefire. The ceasefire is designed to stop the rocket attacks and the aerial raids. Those are not happening. But the clashes today show how fragile this truce was always going to be. And the international community must be concerned that the underlying issues are still there. Those haven't been dealt with. What are you hearing tonight?
Let's put it this way, Francis. It is a real ceasefire, but it's not the first ceasefire, and it's probably not going to be the last, because the fundamental long-standing issues that separate these two sides are not being addressed and have not been addressed for many, many years in what they term direct negotiations, which is the only path certainly, according to the experts we talked to, towards getting a two-state solution, this long-standing goal of both Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The concern here is that what precipitated the rocket fire from Gaza and the response in terms of airstrikes from Israel are things like the evictions of Palestinian families from areas like Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, which Palestine seeks as a future capital of an independent state. Questions around expansion of Israeli and Jewish settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. There are also concerns about divisions within the Palestinian leadership itself. There have not been elections in Palestine, or certainly in terms of the Palestinian Authority, since 2006, Francis. You know there are tensions between Hamas and the Fatah faction of the Palestinian Authority. So these are some of the long-standing issues that need to be negotiated in direct talks. The question we have today is, what path are we going to follow to get those parties around the negotiating table? The answer to that right now is that no one knows.
Yeah. In the meantime, I mean, the damage is being assessed, people going into Gaza, and when conflicts like this pause, as we've seen before, there's the focus on recovery, reconstruction, the humanitarian needs. What more has the UN said on the support that they will be providing, especially in Gaza?
Yeah, it's the circular nature of this conflict, right? You have these pauses, and then you have some peace for a little bit, and then you have something that triggers a conflict. You have missiles flying, and then you need another negotiation for a ceasefire, and then a pause again. And this is what Naledi Pandor, South Africa's international relations minister, refers to as the sense of deja vu. The United Nations has released about $14 million from the occupied Palestinian territories humanitarian fund earlier this year. We told that an additional $4.5 million was released earlier today from the Central Emergency Relief Fund of the United Nations. It's a question that was put to the Secretary General spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric. They tell us that they plan to launch a flash appeal next week. Let's watch.
We also expect to have a 3-month interagency flash appeal for the occupied Palestinian territory issued next week. As soon as we have a firm date, we will let you know, but that'll probably be the middle of the week. Strong financial support is, of course, crucial to meet the needs, especially in Gaza and also in the West Bank. It is also critical that the occupied Palestinian territory humanitarian fund is replenished. This is a flexible tool to quickly respond to urgent needs. Today, 13 humanitarian trucks with food, COVID-19 vaccines, medical disposables, and drugs, including emergency medicines, first aid kits for multiple UN agencies and NGO partners, crossed into Gaza following the partial reopening of the Kerem Shalom crossing.
Palestine's ambassador to the UN telling us earlier this week, Francis, that some 7,000 buildings in Gaza have either been destroyed or damaged. Just imagine and think about that high-rise building that was housing Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. It had offices inside, it had residential apartments inside, several stories. You're talking about internet connections, electricity infrastructure, water and sanitation. That was all decimated by that strike. So the humanitarian need in terms of reconstruction here is very, very vast. And remember, this is on the back of previous conflicts that have also decimated large parts of that area.
Well, Sherwin, somebody very critical here is our own International Relations Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor. We heard from her earlier, saying it's basically ridiculous that it took the UN, the Security Council, so long that the other council had to start looking at it and talking about the United States' role here. So saying she expects so much more. And I guess that reflects frustration in many quarters in other parts of the world as well. Is there a renewed urgency in getting the parties back to direct talks, and how will that play out?
Certainly really pointed remarks from South Africa's International Relations Minister. I'll frame it in two ways. I'll give you what the US is saying. Joe Biden, let me quote him, "I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live in safety and security and enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration," he says, "will continue our quiet, relentless diplomacy towards that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress here." The Secretary General, for his part, Francis, talks about a more multilateral approach as opposed to the quiet diplomatic approach that the US now appears to prefer. The Secretary General talking about the need to revitalize the peace process and to work through structures like the Middle East Quartet that is made up of Russia, the European Union, the United States, and the United Nations in terms of getting a path here towards peace. I can tell you the Palestinians prefer a multilateral approach given their fraught relationship with the U.S. administration, particularly under former President Donald Trump. It was something that Stefan Dujarric also tried to address. This is what he said.
We continue to push to engage in that forum. Obviously, there are 4 parts to a quartet. We represent one leg of that quartet. Others have expressed support. We continue to be in touch with the quartet envoys, and we do hope to be able to engage in that framework. But there are different formats. The quartet, I think, is a critical entity in that it brings together these 4 important parties who have been involved in the process for a long time. It represents, in a sense, the large part of the international community. It has served, I think it has served a positive purpose in the past, and it can continue to do that.
And getting back to the premise of your question, Francis, 4 meetings by the Security Council in the midst of this 11-day conflict, not a single word, a collective statement, not a resolution from that Security Council deferring really to the United States bilateral efforts, the efforts of Qatar, the efforts of Egypt and the United Nations. So the question we all have today is what then is going to be the role of the UN Security Council when it comes to issues of peace and security around the world? That is a big question around its future credibility here.
All right, and that's on your plate for us. Thank you for following this, and he will continue to do so. Sherwin Bryce-Pease live from the United States, from New York.